Okay, hi all, on Play Chess and streaming to YouTube. So this week we're going to carry on looking at the amazing Fischer Spassky match of 1972, I think, which has been referred to as match of the century. Now we reach, after looking at game 12 last week, which was a draw, we reach a pivotal game in the match. If Fischer could win this game, he would be 3 games up. If Spassky won, he'd goes a long way towards equalising the match at this point. 2-1 it will be. So all to play for in this game 13. Unlucky for some, game 13. Now, Boris Spassky was playing white. Should we take Fischer's perspective? Should we take the black pieces? Just run off. Okay, we have e4 from Boris Spassky in game 13. So this was on the 10th of August 1972. Now you might find this very, very surprising. The Alekhine's defense was played. I think Fischer has only used this infrequently, but actually I think about this might be the 6th time, I think I read the 6th time he used the Alekhine's defense in a very serious game. And Spassky chooses to test it. He doesn't play a wimpish move like knight c3, which is actually the second most popular move. You don't have to kick the knight, it's not mandatory. I've played knight c3 a bit. Knight c3 is actually like nearly 2,000 games in my book, but wimpish. If you want to really test the Alekhine's defense, so you kick the knights, and that's the main move. And the knights usually goes to d5, not to g8. Well, that is the second most popular retreat, which is good fun. But knight d5, so it's a hypermodern opening where black is kind of saying to white, you can occupy the center and I'll try and destroy the center later, making use of things like undermining operations. Here, white reinforces the e5 pawn with d4. That's the main move again. c4 is also quite popular, but yeah, d4 is the main move. So d4 was played. And we have d6. Knight f3, pretty standard so far. Now quite often here, black pins that knight. This seems to be the main line to pin the knight. Black can also take on e5. This is quite popular here. Third most popular, g6. So getting a fianchetto to put pressure. Fianchetto bishop across that diagonal. Bishop c4. The knight goes to b6. Bishop drops back. Standard stuff. Bishop g7. Now here, actually, here it gets a little bit unusual from a live book perspective. It seems the most popular move here, 227 games, have knight g5 actually here, looking at f7. Another popular move is a4 or queen e2. These are all pretty popular, or just castling, or even e takes d6. But what was played is kind of rare by Boris. He plays very rare, in fact. There's only like one main game in live book. Knight bd2 was played. Now that looks a little bit strange, doesn't it? Well, if you're an Alekhine defense expert, you might find it's a bit strange. Let's have a quick look, just for a moment, at knight g5 if you want to play this with black. Games apparently leave white with a small edge. I know this looks crazy to hit f7, but this is what people play. Knight e4. And it's dangerous for black. He doesn't want to leave this h6 square by taking a pawn on e5. It will stop him castling. There's also bishop g5 to consider. So this is getting a bit dangerous. Bishop g5 gets a bit dangerous. And apparently this is a really sharp line. It's about equal. Very, very sharp line. But anyway, that isn't played. We see in this game this weird move, knight bd2. I mean, it seems quite sensible. Okay, it hems in the bishop, though. It does hem in the bishop. But the knight, in a way, it wants to go to e4 later. Okay, so black castles here. Let's add a Kibitzer actually as well. Let's add a Kibitzer. Fritz is pretty stable. Pretty stable. Okay. Is black actually threatening anything in particular? Like a pin? It might not be a serious thing, bishop g4, but it does seem to be of concern to Boris Spassky. He plays h3. If he just, let's for sake of argument, the engine is actually suggesting castling might be okay. So what's wrong with bishop g4? Is there anything? It's an okay position. It's an okay position. Anyway, so h3 was played. It does. I mean, every little move, especially pawn moves, that you're creating weaknesses, which are irreversible. So no pressure there when you're doing pawn moves. Just remember they're irreversible. So if it's not essential, yeah, maybe it should be put under scrutiny, the move h3. But it was played. Okay, it just seems to stop the pin. We have a5 now, which does threaten a4. And something quite nasty actually, if this is not reacted to with a4, this I think could get bad. Let's have a quick look. a4, bishop has to go here, protected by the knight. D takes, knight c6, and it looks as though white's center is fragile. This variation apparently is, well, it is very pleasant for black, this position. If the knight has to retreat here, look at this e5 pawn. Oh, now all of that is stopped, but at some cost actually, a little cost, or rather a big cost maybe, depending, well, how you look at it. Another pawn move, a4. You might think, did the pawn have to go to a4? Why not a3? Is that so bad? Again, it seems as though actually if the bishop's on a2, this position is quite nice for black. With knight c6 coming up, it's pretty nice for white. So say white, for sake of argument, did this, e5 looks vulnerable, and if this, then there's bishop d3. Yeah, it looks as though this is unpleasant. So to stop all this, yeah, a4 is played. Creates, oh, where am I going? Creates a lot of counterplay. So a4 fixing a5, but is the pawn at a target? This is the big thing. The a4 pawn, is it a target here? Fischer now takes on e5, takes, and a very interesting move. Knight c6 seems quite natural to hit e5 a bit further, a bit more. That would seem quite good actually here. But a more unusual looking move is played. If knight c6, how does actually white react here? Say queen e2. Yeah, this might be okay. Apparently this looks ugly, but it might actually be quite nice for black to have these double pawns because of that f-file pressure. This position with queen d5 apparently is okay, unless there's rook a3 changing the pitch, or rook e1. Well, anyway, structurally, yeah, it's about equal apparently, but no, we don't get that. We get knight a6. The knight's going to c5 actually, where it will not only put pressure on the bishop, but also of course this pawn on a4. And you might think, well, the two knights, they need something. Well, we can have the queen ganging up as well, or the bishop potentially. So yes, there's some trouble here for a4 coming up now. Knight c5, and in fact so much so Spassky treats this as a positional pawn sacrifice. Can he actually hold the pawn? Well, for the moment he plays queen e2. Sorry, there's a question, why not 9c3? Okay, this is at move 12, queen e2. Alright, 9c3, let's just rewind here. 9c3. Okay, takes, and if takes here, knight c6, this e5 remains weak. If we do this, I think bishop f5 getting into d3 and stopping bishop c2, that would be annoying. And what does white actually do? If bishop here, queen d5, and we've got three things ganging up on e5 now. So this is unpleasant. e5 is actually just literally just dropping off. So yeah, it's difficult position. So 9c3, yeah, it doesn't seem to do that much. Okay, so we'll carry on here. D takes, knight a6, castles knight c5. So queen e2, and now further ganging up coordination with queen e8 on this a pawn. So 3 pieces hitting a4. Might think, hold on a sec, does queen b5 defend a4? Not really, it just transitions into another weakness. Bishop d7, how do we defend this? This, take here, then take on c4. The pawn's a goner, basically. There's no easy way of protecting that pawn, if at all, if there is a way. So instead, yeah, it becomes a positional pawn sacrifice. Spassky plays knight e4, and the pawn drops off. So pawn up from Fischer. Is it the end of the story? No, because there's a wedge pawn here which offers compensation. This wedge pawn blunting the bishop. White's hoping to use this wedge pawn for a kingside attack. And in fact, White gives up voluntarily the light square bishop here. This is an interesting thing to do. White gives up this light square bishop and kind of overprotects the e5 point. This is a kind of overprotection of e5, which is something which often helps as a preliminary to a kingside attack to strengthen central control, particularly e5 as a wedge, blunts the bishop. The knight comes back, taking time to come back. Yes, there's technically an extra pawn here for the future, but before the end game, we have the middle game. The gods created the middle game. So bishop d2. Now maybe this wasn't the most accurate move because the pawn kind of, when it goes to a4, it's kind of safe there. It's protected by two things anyway. So was this accurate? Another idea or move rather, or idea, bishop e3. Maybe white can then consider even doubling here and then just central control move. So I'm not sure. I think this has come into some criticism by some commentators on this game. Bishop d2 might not have been the greatest. There's also, I mean, bishop g5 might be interesting, with the idea of the classic idea of just trying to exchange off this defensive bishop. If bishop e6, queen d2, we get a chance to park the queen, I think, or even take on a5 if black's not careful. So that move might not even be possible, but we get a chance to get rid of this bishop or not. Or maybe some preparation first with queen f4. So that was another idea, to immediately try to use the bishop for a battery to get rid of this bishop. But we see bishop d2, yeah. Possibly a slight inaccuracy. a4, and the bishop now goes to g5. So we've got the same sort of ideas as previously mentioned. h6, bishop h4. And now possibly bishop e6 might be one of the more accurate moves, or bishop d7 could go to c6 later. But this move is a little bit provocative by Fischer. Bishop f5. It provokes, in principle, a forcing move g4, which may or may not be useful to white at some future point. In fact, Spassky gives it a punt here, right here and now. He plays g4, so provocation. Or is it creating weaknesses? I don't know. White's got that central grip, central control. The bishop doesn't want to give itself up on e4. Surely not. This does seem to be the most sensible move, bishop e6. If taking, yeah, this queen's going to be great compensation. In fact, what to do about b7? If we play this, well, queen d4 hitting the knight. What to do about the knight? As an example, then things start dropping off. Yeah, no, you can't do that. No, the bishop goes back. Even though it would be an idea, it seems that knight is too nice there on e4 at the moment. But okay, this move seems to provoke knight d4. And yes, curious position this. There's a weakness of the last move, which is actually the e-pawn. It does seem as though that might be hanging here. The e-pawn. Why isn't the e-pawn hanging here? Fischer actually played bishop c4. And I don't know, maybe this is beyond Fritz, the chess engine. It does say to take on e5. Let's have a quick look. Taking on e5. Is this going to be radically punished? Knight takes. Takes. And it looks mega ugly, right? But black has got ideas like this and this. What does white do? Let's just get this position. Okay, so say c3. Bishop d6. With e5 to follow. It might not be that bad. And then queen c6 later, you know, as an example. This sort of stuff doesn't seem that bad at all for black. But to humanise the pawn structure is a bit of a wreck, so maybe just in principle we value arithmetics, not allowing this knight takes e6. I mean, it seems in many ways to kind of fall into white's general piling of pressure on the e file that you don't want to have double pawns here. But yeah, the pawn is there for the taking. And before we move on from this point, blimey, this is going to be a long session. I'm going to invite any questions. Do you think bishop takes e5 is unplayable? I'll give you 20. Anyone thinks bishop takes e5 is unplayable? Maybe there's some documented analysis we can prove or disprove. Because this is the first hanging pawn. I've been encouraged on YouTube to explain all the hanging pawns at least. Is there an explanation for this? Is it just intuitive compensation? The bishop, it seems from an engine point of view, can take the pawn, go back to d6, follow up with e5 and maybe queen f7, and it seems as though black might be okay. In fact, this bishop would then be potentially locked out of the game on g3 as well. So unless anyone intimately knows the analysis for this game, I'm going to proceed now from move 20. Okay. If anyone wants a further investigation of why bishop takes e5, I could try a different engine or whatever, but that would risk crashing the whole broadcast. So let's stick with Fritz, yeah, because it's quite stable here. But it seems to indicate that bishop takes e5 might be playable. In fact, it's changed its mind on a higher depth to Fischer's move. At depth 23, it comes up with Fischer's move here instead of bishop takes e5. It marginally favours now bishop c4 to bishop takes e5. So yeah, Fischer obviously, yeah, he's like a computer at high depth. Bishop c4. So now we have the move queen d2, and again it seems as though e5 is it possible to take on e5? Because if we take on e5, yes, we might lose h6. or not. No, hang on, the bishop's on d4. Let's have a quick look. So here, queen d7 was played. So this is another tempting point. Why not bishop takes e5? Knight c5. It wouldn't be nice to give up the dark square bishop. No, we don't want to do this. And this looks mega ugly. f6 again. But apparently this position might be okay for black. It's not the sort of thing which you want to do in a hurry. But it might be okay. Might actually be playable. Takes. And if here there's a3, and if here queen f7, and if we give up the exchange, we've got loads of compensation here in the form of a3, and the queen's actually supporting a2 as well. So that's okay for black, it seems. Anyway, so bishop again, he rejects taking this pawn on e5. He plays queen d7. Okay, so what's happening here? Spassky again leaves the pawn that seems like to hang. He plays rook ad1. This hanging pawn mystery on e5. Again, it's just not taken in this position. Taking, but we do have queen takes h6 here. But we have taken a center pawn here. So this position is apparently okay for black. This should favour black. If you give up h6 for the e5 pawn, it's knocked out a bit white's central control. This position here apparently is okay for black. This is from a scientific perspective. Well, not scientific. From a heavy analysis perspective, it seems as though taking on e5, there's now been three occasions where it might have been technically possible. But we want positions that are easy to play, right, as humans. So yeah, rook fe8 is played. And the pawn's actually now protected with f4. And there would seem to be a logical prospect of putting the bishop here and playing for f5, which would look really dangerous, because then you've got things like e6 on the cards as an example, or even f6 there. But okay, bishop d5 is played. For the moment, f5 is impossible. It needs to be, like, e5 needs to be supported. f5 here, we do just take on. Do we just take on e5? Maybe that's a bit dangerous. No, that is dangerous for the king. Pardon me. No, knight c4 is the way to take on e5, leaving the bishop, defending h6. And this is going to be good. Either take on b2 or take on e5 here, actually. Alright. So, we said instead we see knight c5 hitting the queen. Queen drops back. And if we look visually at this position, just visually, elevate from the variations of the moves for a moment. White does seem to have quite a beautiful position now, and definite compensation for Fischer's extra pawn. Because if you look, the rooks are nicely in the centre. Look at black's rooks. The pawns look actually quite menacing. If only bishop g3, then f5. This all looks pretty menacing, and especially the knights look really happy. At this point, white's position, if we were to be objective, looks like a very happy position to be in. Okay, technically black is a pawn up, but let's ask the question here. I don't want to bias things by carrying on about it, but who do you prefer here at this stage? So this is at move 24 after queen c8. If I give you like 20 seconds, who do you prefer here? What do you think about this position? Any comments? Okay, black's bishop is central though. You might like black's bishop across the diagonal. Anyway, this next move did get criticism from a number of sources. This next move, and there's something bad in principle. It looks like there's something bad in principle about Boris Spassky's next move, Queen C3. It looks bad in principle because it is on an X-ray diagonal. You know, this queen has now targeted itself in the future to the G7 bishop somehow. The engine evaluation shift is definitely in black's favour here. In fact, A3 seems to be something going on with A3 and knight C4. Threatening, and if this C6 with the idea of B6, and it looks as though the engine's really kind of liking black here. Yeah, if this A pawn drops off, it looks as though this is fun. So the Queen C3, yeah, it looks in principle as though it could be tactically dodgy. In our current engine era, when it, if you play a move like that against a computer, you're asking for trouble. If not now, then in a few moves for sure. Computer's going to expose this somehow, and Fischer's quite sharp tactically, so how can he expose this X-ray on white's queen? Well, his first move actually is E6 in this position, because white might be threatening F5, so he plays E6, and note we've got a characteristic little bit of a French defense pawn structure going on, and if you know your French defense pawn chains and where to undermine, usually you do want to play F5 against this French defense thing and try and rip open the F file. Now to do this here, I mean this is prophylaxis against F5, right? F5 does seem a bit ruled out here. If F5, then surely we just take here and then we just take on E5. And there shouldn't be any big problem here. This position is great for black. In fact, black can even play a move like G5. And the bishops are actually looking fantastic here. This is a great position for black, and there's also potentially rook F3 on the cards. So that would be a total nightmare to play F5 there. Nevertheless, the move bishop G3 might have something going for it to try and prepare F5. Unless it's too slow. Bishop F8. Is this too slow? E takes. G takes. Maybe F5 doesn't do too much. We take there anyway. Well, yeah, it looks like maybe black looks to be surviving this position. Well, apparently black's surviving this sort of position with stuff like this, and rook G8 to come, maybe like trying to hijack the G file there. So anyway, yeah, but some commentators have indicated that this does imply a French defense pawn structure, this position, and F5 is a kind of implied thematic break you might want to prepare with bishop G3 for F5. You might want to consider that anyway. This next move by Boris Spassky is given some criticism by some sources. The engine suggestions like B5. I'm not sure what the idea of that is in particular. What is the actual follow-up? I'm not entirely sure, but maybe it's just an awkward looking position. If here that loses the queen, can't move the queen there. What does black actually do? It seems a bit tied up. C6. The knight can go to D6. Maybe it's just to tie black up a bit more. C6 is impossible. Yeah, I'm not sure what black actually does. He tries to kick one of the knights. But anyway, the next move, it came under some criticism, King H2. Seems a bit of a time waste, but on the other hand, it does vacate g1, you know, maybe f5 later with the g file. So we see knight d7 challenging this knight now. The pawn's protected by the rook adequately to do this. The knight drops back. But now we have the forcing move c5. And note this diagonal is being more amplified by kicking the knight off d4. You'll note that the diagonal, the bishop's staring at the queen through the pawn. And Fischer taps into this little fact, little trivia fact. If well, the knight can't go to f3, and if it moves to e2, then b5 might actually be good here, with a pawn avalanche coming. So anyway, we see knight b5, and Fischer plays the forcing move queen c6, and all of a sudden this is really significant. This x-ray, it becomes part of the main game continuation now. Where's the knight going? Can't really go back without affording this pawn avalanche. So b4 coming up. So black's pieces all of a sudden, they look much more coordinated. White plays knight d6. And yes, we use this with queen takes d6. So it's one step towards getting into an endgame scenario where the extra pawn might be more significant after e takes. Not only that, white's pawns get doubled here, and it seems the bishop is in an ideal spot to at least get the pawn to a2, the extra pawn to a2. White does, with this pawn, now seem to be positionally threatening knight e5. That would look extremely unpleasant because white will control a lot of the dark squares here and would, on taking, be reinforcing the d6 pawn. So this next move seems to be designed against knight e5. Just so this is hammered home, this knight e5 point. Instead of f6, let's imagine Fischer didn't play f6 and played a3. Let's just imagine. Actually, it's still good for black. Apparently, it's a good position, this knight e5. We can ignore this. We don't have to take on e5. We can play bishop c6, apparently. And this should be okay for black. Good for black, apparently. We have got a clear past a pawn. It doesn't matter about white's dark square control. So anyway, yeah, f6 though keeps the knight out of e5. And there's no bishop which has been hemmed in or anything, so the bishop's been swapped off over there. So having pawns on dark squares is no big deal. There's no bad pieces. I think that was one of the comments some grandmasters have made about Fischer games. He rarely has any bad pieces. He hasn't got bad pieces here. He's got the protected past a pawn, and white structure looks questionable here. And now white does try and pierce open this diagonal, because actually black might even consider, I guess, g5 at some point, but white pierces the dark squares with this move g5, h takes, or tries to. But now we have f5. It does give the e5 square, f5, but it hems in this bishop. And this is another protected pass pawn. There are two protected pass pawns at this stage in the position, in theory. We have bishop g3, which keeps a locking key on the e5 square, and provides for knight e5 later with some extra option of bishop e5. If a bishop's here, it's not only defending against this guy, but it might also coordinate against the king if there's a rook lift later. So this is like dual purpose. Of if a bishop's controlling e5, as you might expect, it would be a highly versatile bishop. So this e5 control is not insignificant. We see king f7, and white plays for that. Knight e5 check, knight takes, bishop takes. So it's a potentially defensive bishop, at least tactically, with c4, and also attacking if a rook can assist. We have b5, so Fischer's getting along with trying to get these pawns going. Rook f1, which does carry the idea that, yeah, the bishop is a great piece and it needs support, like this. This is quite dangerous because the bishop's controlling h8. There would be no, it seems, immediate defense with rook h8 unless black wants to give up the exchange. But this is a special case position where black wouldn't mind giving up the exchange because he has got great compensation. He's already got pass pawn trump cards over here, so is giving up the exchange a big deal against rook f4 to h4? Is it? Rook h8 is actually played immediately in this position, wanting to give up the exchange, volunteering it. Is it that critical? I think a3 is playable as well. Rook f4, as long as it's played now, because otherwise white's going to clamp down on the h8 square. This sort of position is just at least equal for white, where the rook's got the options now, and also d7 might be a threat. So no, want to challenge this rook h4 to h7. It's rook h8 would be essential there, but it's played immediately at the first sniff of rook f4 to h4. Very first sniff here, Fischer plays rook h8 now. Positional sacrifice, part of his toolkit. We have to get rid of this. This bishop on e5 is a wonderful piece, wonderfully centralized. Spassky doesn't want to give it away. He plays actually bishop f6. And we have a3, rook f4, and you might think rook f4? What's going on with rook f4? There's ideas like d7 going on as well, though. As well as potentially c4 tactically if needed. We have a2 threatening actually the major threat might actually be something more subtle like e5 first. A1 as a threat might not actually be a big deal here, in fact. Because of d7. No, that is a big deal. Sorry, rook f2, a2. Yeah, this bishop is used for defense with the move c4. It opens up the bishop now defensively. And remember, white's got this d7, so it looks as though white's going to be potentially gaining some material here with another way, not just bishop takes h8. Bishop takes c4 is played. If b takes c4, this is a really complicated position now, but if b takes d7, and what's the idea? The idea might be something like taking, and okay, d7 here. I think still black is okay. If c3, black should be okay technically. Apparently this is going to be okay for black apparently. But okay, let's focus on the game continuation because this is really complicated stuff. This is move 40. We're approaching a German, by the way, for resumption later overnight analysis. Move 42 rather is going to be a sealed move. This is at move 40 c4. So what on earth is going on here? White's got trump cards, black's got trump cards. Now in this position, bishop takes c4 is played. So Fischer is seemingly inviting things like d7 as well as bishop takes h8. d7 is played now. And we have bishop d5. And this is the sealed move, and apparently it was after more than 25 minutes of thought. There's a deep think, about 20 minutes. Let's keep that a bit vague. I think it was about 20 minutes of thought for this, at least 20 minutes, for this next sealed move, which is actually king g3. So at move 42, king g3. And overnight analysis will obviously favour those that have got great seconds in the team that are going to be willing to work overnight for resumption the next day. So king g3. Okay, so this is going into the next session now at move 42. This endgame position. Now, just to rule some simple things out. If a1, we don't want to exchange off the rooks, do we? I think we might want to, actually. We might want to take here. This is going to be okay for white. If we take with the bishop, that runs into a check, apparently. Check. We can move this. We get time with the check. We get time to get this pawn without losing the rook, and this will be fine apparently for black. This sort of continuation is fine for black. The king is wriggling out. For example, like this, we can wriggle the king out. And if here, you might think that's scary because it's cutting some exits from the king. But this position apparently is okay as well. The two rooks can protect each other. And the checks, king's going to get at c6. That should be okay. So we're going far. So, okay, so apparently, yeah, king g3, if we go back to this king g3, this a1 in this position doesn't seem so significant. At all. So check. No, Fischer keeps that pawn. Check. c3, and this rook is now attacked. It's moved out of the way, or is it? Nope. We have, yes, pardon me. Sorry, we have rook h8, getting the rook out of the way, and seemingly now the lethal coordination move, which looks pretty dangerous on paper, to coordinate rook and bishop. Rook h4. I think it's white's only move basically in this position, because with the blockage of here, I mean, black is going to be queening, right? So rook h4. And an escape square is created. The e6 is actually an escape square is created with e5. We have check, king e6, check, king d6, and so the king's looking at both of them, right? So we can't take it here because we're actually going to take the rook. So rook takes e5, of course, but it does block protection of c3. So Fischer takes on c3, and note he's now got, in principle, 3 connected passed pawns, which is usually a good thing to have. Check. But he is losing this bishop. He's losing a whole piece here. He takes d7. So he's up a load of pawns for a bishop. Rook e takes d5. King c6. And you might think, can't this king be checked to death, or at least a perpetual check? Actually, the king can potentially wriggle out. Check, king b7. Check, king a6. And the king can actually do this sort of thing if checked anymore. If rook d6 check like this, king a5, black's going to be laughing. So a very tricky position. Spassky plays rook 7 back to d2. We have rook takes d2, king takes d2. So 3 connected pass pawns versus the bishop. But also note it's a 2-to-1 here, so a pass pawn can be born here. The g pawn can be born as a pass pawn in theory and in practice. b4. h4. White wants to create his pass pawn with h5 kind of rapidly. King b5. h5. This is just ignored in interest of the speed of black's pass pawns. It's ignored to take that for a moment. c4 is played. And that's immediately threatening to blunt the diagonal, by the way, on a1. So if h6, this is a bit of a disaster because of c3 blunting the diagonal, and then we've got a1 coming. So we queen, yeah, and then we're kind of getting behind this pawn over here. This one seems the most accurate. To get the point behind the pawn there, and if white queens, this situation with the 2 connected pass pawns and the pass pawn here is the bishop can't really do anything in this scenario. Here it's helpless because the king kind of comes in. So that's just easily winning for black, that sort of scenario. So okay, we'll go back. So c4 threatening c3, rook a1 is played, keeping a blockade firmly on the a pawn. Now Fischer takes here, giving that g pawn. Interesting, but now there's this h pawn. Yes, it's a really complicated position. You might, one question might be, okay, there's g7 as played, but what about taking here? Rook g8 would actually snap that pawn. If takes here, this is and we lost the internet connection. Have I just lost connection to the server? Okay, I'm going to carry on this game. Okay. Anyway, as I was saying, h3, bishop e7 was played. Because if bishop e5... check here, h2. And if takes here, check. And b3 is, these pawns are just crushing. They're absolutely crushing in this scenario, so it can't be, that can't happen. There's an avalanche potentially of these 3 connected pass pawns. So yeah, bishop e7 has the idea of bishop f8 queening this guy instead. So the rook has to get to g8 here now, because if h2, bishop f8 should secure white equality this position, because this pawn's like queening. So that's avoided. Fischer avoids that scenario. He plays rook g8. We have bishop f8. So we have this stranded rook, but we have loads of pawns all over the place. Space invaders. h2, tying down this rook. Can't take that one without allowing the queen, right? Yeah, if we take, we can just, surely we can just queen. So the rook is tied down, and this rook's tied down. Both rooks are tied down, and the bishop's kind of tied down as well. Yeah. And the king really wants to break through this force field So the force field is taken off with this pawn sack to release white's control on that d file, so the king can step across. Takes king d5, the king stepping across. We have king b2 here. This might be an inaccuracy though of the game. King b2 apparently, like check, apparently is equal, because I think we could just carry on like this, if here like this, and if ever this. Okay, hang on, let's see what happens here. Munching all the pawns. So apparently, yeah, there might be an opportunity. It'll be like a draw here, for Boris Spassky to have held this position, even though this looks absolutely ingenious, this h1 move. From an engine perspective, it seems as though, I know it looks ingenious for the king to step across, but from an engine perspective, black's nearly +5 here with the move f4. Apparently this is just a really strong move in this position. What is black threatening? Like f3. Let's say white does this, then the king can get here, right? Let's say check. King here. Check. Check here. Alright, so what's the idea? The rook goes back. f3, and let's see what the idea is. Are we reaching a Zugzwang, or is this just confused evaluation? Let's reach this position here. Let's just reach this position for a moment, right? Rook f1. Now, surely, in fact, the king can step across, because the rook has been consigned to the fence. Nope. Basically, the rook's useless, and the king is useless, so it can't step across. So this might be drawing, actually, even if the engine says it's near +5. This is appears to be a fortress position, unless anyone wants to say otherwise. This is a fortress position. This is draw, isn't it? Drawn, isn't it? Does anyone, hang on, this is just a variation. Does anyone want to disagree that this is drawn? Speak now or forever hold your peace. This is drawn, this position, isn't it? The engine says nearly +5. I don't know, this might be an upgrade on Fischer's idea, because we have a pawn on f2. It seems that there's more than +5 now on h1, actually. Takes, king steps across. King b2, king e4, rook f1. We've improved on Fischer's thing here, haven't we? Because the king's now holding e2. King's coming to e2. Check. Now not here, because that loses f2, that's a draw, but in this position, king d3. And now we're at +8. Now this does seem to imply the fortress is not working as advertised that I mentioned. White appears to be in big trouble now, very big trouble. Let's imagine king a1, then there's c3, and king e2. Yeah, that's the end of the game, isn't it? Whew. Oh, there's rook takes g7. Easy. So yeah, it seems as though, hang on, let's compare and contrast. The engine's suggestion, which it seems to like more than Fischer's move, is essentially to get the same idea, to break the force field by sacking the h-pawn, but first put the pawn here on f2, then play h1. That would seem to be the recommendation. Yeah, f2 stops rook e1. Thank you, Andy Hammond 32 on stream. f2 stops e1. So the engine's not completely out of its mind about having a pawn on f2 here. Yeah, it seems to work like clockwork there to breach the position. The way it's being played here at move 64 is h1 immediately. So we've still got the pawn here, right? And apparently this is a draw, and I can clip the analysis if you want to see it. I'm going to clip it to the stream thing. I wonder if this is going to work. No, it's not. It's too much analysis to paste to you. Hold on. If I just reduce it a bit. I have to reduce it a bit. No, it's not accepting. But anyway, I'll get it to a certain. There. See that equal? Do you see that equal? I've posted that on stream. I've posted the clipped analysis here on stream. Let's just do one final sanity check on this position, yeah. So it seems, yeah, f4 might actually be a fortress breaking move. We had, if we have rook a1, then the king is stepping in, right? The king just steps in. Rook, not rook a1. We have the check to keep the king out, but then the pawn makes some progress. Yeah, I don't know how. So we get the pawn on f2 first, eventually, and then we install the pawn there. The rook's kind of overloaded, and then we go king c6 to d5, and then we sack the h pawn. We get our king d5. So we get this position where the rook is still overloaded now by both pawns. The king comes in this position, even though there's bishop c5 check. In this position, king d3 is winning, as this shows. You'll see that king d3 in this position is winning. I'll give you the exhibit, evidence exhibit, right? King d3. It's not going to let me show you it, but it's definitely got that as winning here. That's shown as winning, king d3 in this position. And this is incredible, because if bishop takes f2, we've got king e2, and this is hopeless for white there. If rook takes f2, we've got c3 check. We're going to queen this pawn. All right, incredible stuff. So yeah, Fischer's move, okay, was immediately queening. So he immediately queens and plays king d5. So apparently there's a way for Spassky to draw this, but not with king b2 here. Not with king b2. Rather with check. And you might think king e4. Then apparently something like this. Yeah, we've seen this before. So fascinating stuff. The pawn's stuck on f5 here. It doesn't help matters that much, apparently. But king b2, thankfully for Fischer, was played. And now f4, check, the king comes in. d3, check. The king's come right in there. f3, bishop c5, and actually as well as f2, which is winning. Rook takes g7 is winning as well. Rook takes c4. This position is really winning for black, even with f2 now. This would be great for black. Fischer chose rook d7 with the idea of check and then check. So evict the king out and queen. So we're going to be queening soon with the check, and a1 check. That's the idea here. Because remember, this check's lethal because the pawn's covering c2, etc. So rook e4 check, king f1. So again, black is threatening simply check and queen. Bishop d4. But now f2 is played, and here at move 75, Spassky resigns because, for example, rook f4, black now is triumphs with rook takes d4. The pawns triumph. Rook takes king e2. The rook and the king cannot cope with these pawns. Say like this there. Queening. Here, this is just a protected passed pawn scenario. Winning. The pawns are untouchable because we're just going to queen. Yeah, so an easy game there to look at. This is like a mammoth, gigantic battle game. Gigantic battle. But yeah, Fischer found a way to break through, which was helped with king b2. Should we just say that? It helped that white played king b2. So, but technically the position in theory was winning anyway. Fischer had the right idea. He could have, apparently there's a better implementation of the same idea. So it's still Fischer's idea. Basically, you know, you sack the h-pawn eventually with the pawn on f2. Great improvement. But yeah. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube, and see you next week for the last session in the King's Crusher radio show this year, and we'll carry on February 6th, January 6th or 7th, the first Tuesday in January after, round about that time, 5th, 6th, first Tuesday next year. So I hope, but no, we've got one more session next Tuesday. Please remember to do a like on the video. Yeah, likes are much appreciated. If you like this video, likes are much appreciated. That will help boost the video profile. So okay, thanks very much. See you next week. I'm going to stop the stream now unless there's any other questions. Well, no. Comments or questions on YouTube. If you've got any other questions, post them on YouTube. I'll try and get to them, or someone else will. Okay. Thanks very much.